welcome everybody. So appreciate you coming, taking your time out of your evening to come here and enjoy this program that we have going on. So as you can see, you probably walked around, saw the microcars. So we're going to talk about the microcars. Derek will be presenting. What I'd like to do in the beginning is just kind of cover a couple of the events that are coming up first, and then go ahead and introduce Derek, and then let Derek go ahead. Then when Derek is done, we'll have a couple microphones that we can pass out to you guys to ask questions. And if you would, please wait for the microphone to get to you, because we are recording this, both video and audio. And it'd be great if we could get your question on the audio also. And then after that's over, then we'll let you guys come down if you want to take pictures or ask some other questions maybe. And then wrap up about 8:30. So, okay. So if you guys don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and talk about what we have coming up. So on December 2nd, maybe you guys noticed the brass era cars there in the Great Hall. We have Corky Coker. Maybe you guys know Corky from Coker Tires, and King Gross. They're going to be here, and they're going to do a discussion that we call Fast Talk about fast brass. So that's December 2nd, so put that on your calendars. And then also wanted to mention a couple of the upcoming exhibits. And the upcoming exhibits that we have going on would be the Fabulous Fins. So December 6th, we have going into Gallery C, so the big blocks will transition out. We'll have Fabulous Fins coming in. Next in Gallery B, which is the one right in front of the theater, we'll be pulling those cars out. And from January 10th through April 30th, we have what we call Built for a Crisis. And you guys, what does that mean? I don't know if you guys remember the oil embargo crisis from the 70s. So we got some cars that are kind of represented from, that 73, 4, 5 time frame that we thought would be interesting for you guys to remember driving those cars. And so then we also have end of January, the next exhibit we'll be doing is one called Locally Owned. And so what we're doing is we're talking to people that we know have very interesting cars that are here from Georgia, kind of the surrounding counties, and we'll bring those in. And then the next one we'll be changing out was for British Invasion. So we've got some of the British post-war kind of two-seat kind of sports cars coming in here that we're calling British Invasion. So, and that'll start February 10th. One other item to talk about is coming soon, starting December 1st. We're doing the 12 days of member appreciation. So check your emails. We'll be giving out a lot more information about that. So you'll get to see there's a different item for each day during those 12 days. So, okay. So one thing I'd like to do before I mention Derek, we also have another special guest. I just wanted to introduce him real quick, and that's Jeff Lane. So if you happen to see a gentleman pop up with a microphone during part of the presentation, that's going to be Jeff. He has a couple things he wanted to point out during Derek's talk. But I'll go ahead now and introduce Derek. Derek, he's the curator there at the Lane Motor Museum. Previously, he worked at the Henry Ford and the Crawford Auto Aviation, along with, maybe you guys know him also from the National Corvette Museum when he was the curator there at NCM. He collects kind of the pre-World War II era cars, and he's big into preservation, such that, you try and keep the car as original as possible. He graduated from Eastern Michigan with a degree in, history of technology? Yep. And so I'd like to go ahead and introduce Derek. So thanks, Derek. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, I think we're on. Cool. All right, well, thank you all for coming out. With any presentation we typically do, even at the Lane Motor Museum, especially on our demo days, every day at 11 o'clock when we're open to the public, we do a demonstration run of a couple of our vehicles. I always like to ask, how many people have been to the Lane Motor Museum? How many do we have here? Those are some really bright lights. That's fantastic. It's good to see. And, you know, a lot of times we get people that in the group, nobody raises their hand. We like to see that at the museum because it means we must be doing something that interests those folks to bring them in and see the unique and odd collection of vehicles that Jeff and the museum has been able to acquire and build over the years. So that'll be, ooh, this thing vibrates when you click it. That's weird. Okay, so I didn't practice before this, so at the Lane Motor Museum, I'm going to give you a little background on who we are. We have just over 555 cars in the collection. That does not count the 60 or so motorcycles and scooters in the collection, 15 airplanes, 50 plus bicycles, 10 military vehicles, and a handful of other small artifacts, as well as an archive, library and archive that we have in the collection. And the archive, believe it or not, for the unique vehicles that we have, actually has quite a bit of archival information on these vehicles that we have been able to acquire over the years. So really a fantastic museum to visit and do some research at sometimes as well. It is the largest collection of European vehicles in the United States, but we have cars from all around the world, actually, Asia, South America, the United States. We have various vehicles from numerous countries all around the world. And we tend to think that, or we like to say that we specialize in the technically significant and the uniquely different. And I think uniquely different is in front of you tonight and just outside the theater here in the gallery where we have the Microcar Marvels exhibit. It was actually quite exciting, I think, when Bruce came to Jeff and I and talked about this exhibit. You know, we have 550 cars in the collection. We can display about 130 to 150 of those at one time in our gallery space that we have. So we have a number of cars, as you can imagine, in storage that aren't being seen all the time. So we like to loan those vehicles out to other institutions and let them be seen all around the country. So it was very exciting to get to have this opportunity and collaborate on this exhibit and get some of these cars that are often just seen at the museum or in storage out in front of a new audience here in Georgia. So, background on the Lane Motor Museum, who we are, how we came to exist, all of that wonderful information that people typically like to know. So Jeff, who is our founder, obviously you'd probably tell by his last name, he started a private collection of vehicles, had love for MGs as a child, helped his dad restore TF, got his own TF at the age of 12. Correct? Yes. And took his driver's test in that car after he restored it because it came to him in parts. And as he kind of kept going and collecting vehicles, eventually he was encouraged by many people, friends, family, various people, to make the collection accessible to the public because it was a collection of vehicles you typically did not see in the United States. And after some thought, he thought that was a pretty good idea. So he started looking around the Nashville area where he lived, was living, and actually found an old bakery. If you all remember, American Bread Company made a bread called Sunbeam Bread. And the building that we are in was the Sunbeam Bakery for the Southeast United States. So Jeff acquired the building. And this is a look inside the building right around 2002, I think this was. Okay, I'm getting the dates right. The boss is here, so I have to be accurate. So this is Jeff standing inside the basically recently acquired building and probably dreaming a little bit about what it would become, I would think. And, so you can see it was pretty much an empty shell. They had to move a lot of equipment out. There was still quite a bit of equipment inside. Obviously do some renovation work and make it a little more suitable for the museum setting. And today you see This is a shot from a few years ago, but a good look inside the building and what it looks like today. And you see various country flags hanging in the background there. So we do have some various exhibits on British cars, French cars. We tend to kind of shake things up every year and do different exhibits in various spaces around the museum. So some of the uniquely different and technologically significant vehicles we have in the collection. This is actually a recreation of Dymaxion car number 1. Our Buckminster Fuller experimented around with an idea for a 3-wheeled vehicle, streamlined. He built, as I say, built 3 of these vehicles. Only one exists today in Reno, Nevada at the National Automobile Museum. That's car number 2. Car number 1 and car number 3 were basically destroyed in various accidents over time. And so Jeff and the museum's interest in Buckminster Fuller and his mindset of the technological advancements or improvements that he was trying to figure out with the Dymaxion project led Jeff and the team to come up with the idea to create this replica recreation of the Dymaxion car. Fortunately, when they were having it built at a shop in Czechoslovakia, Cora, they re-engineered a few things in the car to make it a little bit safer than the first car that Bucky built. So, as I say, we also have cars from around the world. This is our Tatra T97, Czechoslovakian-built car, known for their advancements in streamlining the automobile and aerodynamics. And we actually house the largest collection of Tatras outside of Czechoslovakia. So, fantastic opportunity to see some extremely advanced automobiles coming out of that part of the world. And then, as many of you have said to us tonight, you love our propeller-driven vehicles. So we do have a large propeller-driven collection, this probably being one of the most significant in the collection, or at least most well-known in the collection. This is the 1932 Helicron that was built in France, one-of-a-kind car built in the coastal plains region of France. We also, speaking of technologically significant and uniquely different, this is a gyroscopically balanced car called the Gyro X, built by the Summers Gyroscope Company and designed by none other than a gentleman named Alex Tremulous. Some of you probably recognize that name, legendary industrial and automotive designer in the U.S. And we also have cars from Japan. This is a S800. We also have a large collection of the K cars, the K class of Japanese automobiles, which fit a little bit into the Microcar story for what they are. They are a very small car. There's a certain regulations and rules they have to meet in Japan to be that Keisha class that they call it. We shorten it down to K class, Japanese automobile. So you can just see from this slide that we have a lot of different things to offer in the museum just with our automobile collection. And this isn't counting the motorcycles, scooters, and all the other things we have. So we also go to the extremely large. Outside, yes. This doesn't fit in the building. This is our Lark. So this was an amphibious landing vehicle during the Korea-Vietnam era. And these were not necessarily an attack vehicle. This wasn't like your duck boats and things that would take soldiers ashore during what you see during D-Day during World War II. These were actually more for moving supplies. So if there wasn't a port that one of our larger ships could get into, they would use these to go out, get supplies, and bring them back in. All the way up to, there were some of the military vehicles fit inside of this vehicle and could be carried from ship to shore. And 26 ton, what is the tonnage on it? 100 ton, I'm sorry. Yeah, 100 ton carrying capacity. So it is a massive, massive vehicle. The tires are about 8 feet tall, so it is very large and it is out back. And then, of course, down to the small. Some of the world's smallest automobiles ever built, the PLP-50, which you see here behind me, and this little guy called La Carabe, or the Ground Beetle, which was a single seat, one person, very, very small kit car that you could actually buy plans for to build at home. So, what is a microcar? A microcar is a small, fuel-efficient car, typically 3 or 4 wheeled, that maintains a cubic centimeter cc engine displacement under 400 cc. This is a kind of a broad definition, I guess I'll say. There are some cars that fall just outside of this, but it's the way we at the Lane try to define a microcar. It's typically, the microcar era is typically confined to the years between 1945 and 1965. Again, you'll see tonight there's a little bit of bleed either side of that. And most of these small cars are before 1945 were typically referred to as cycle cars, especially in the pre-World War II era. And post-1965, you're really looking at what becomes compact, subcompact cars, or the people's cars that were coming out of Germany and places like that. So that kind of is a broad definition, let's call it, not necessarily all-encompassing, but something that we try to keep as our focus of what a microcar is at the museum. So, to launch into, initially we were thinking about doing a gallery walk, but with the number of people that we had sign up for this, Bruce thought that probably wasn't a good idea. We couldn't get everybody around and be able to hear. So I basically want to do a little bit of a virtual gallery walk, and we brought 4 of the cars in here that I specifically want to point some things out on, but talk about each car and why it's interesting and unique. So the new map baby, VB4, which is the first car you see up here pointing out at you, this is a French microcar, and you'll see this is kind of one of those that bleed a little before that definition that we have, 1939. This is when some of the very first microcars were coming out in France and Italy. So it's actually, New Map is a motorcycle company when they get started out, and then right around 1938, Paul Martin, who is the founder and head of New Map, decides that it's time to build and I don't speak French, so I apologize if I butcher any words tonight that are in a foreign language, voiturette in the market, which voiturette is simply just typically a small car. That's what that term means. So he added what he liked to call the diminutive New Map Baby to his lineup, and the VB is Voiturette Baby. And it was a very simple roadster, as you can see, and 330 pounds. It had no doors. It actually just had kind of a nice drop sweep here on the body, and you would be able to step over, get in it. Enough room for 2 people. And I think one of the interesting things about this car, and whether or not there's proof of it, but Ford here in America had become very prolific all around the world, and of course had assembly plants all around the world. And this car has a lot of the styling of the late 1930s Fords, and kind of lends that idea that Ford was having an impact around the world in styling. So one of the interesting key features of this car, a lot of times people will be at the museum and question that. Why does it look like a 37-ish Ford? And that kind of wide range that Ford had, I think, influenced some of the design work on cars of this period. So, as I said, it's one of the few pre-war examples of a microcar, and it carries a Fitchel and Sachs engine, and the 4-spoke aluminum steering wheel, and there's a reduction gearbox on that column that, oh, I thought I saw something move. I apologize. And then the interesting thing, too, is the hood and all of this, none of this opens. It's all stamped, solid metal. There's no access under there, and access to the engine at the back, and all of that. So, very early in the microcar days, and but still, carrying that styling of a regular automobile, which the microcar world didn't always do, as we're going to see as we move forward. So the Larmar, let me see if I can do this because I got two remotes here. So we're going to bring the Larmar around, and I'll talk a little bit about it. And this actually holds the claim to be the world's narrowest car. It is only 2 feet and 4 inches wide. So the reason for that is that it was designed to pass through your garden gate in England. So they were built in England. And basically, it was the fact that around a lot of the major cities, oh, look at that. There was already parking problems. Vehicles were springing up, especially in the post-war era. We'd already had a boom of the automobile all around the world, and parking had become difficult, as I say, in a lot of the cities. So the idea of the Larmar was to be able to have your own kind of city car, a car you could drive around in the city, go get groceries, do running. Obviously, it's a single-person car. You're not going to carry the family in this. But when you got home, if there was no parking, you would be able to drive this through your garden gate and park in your garden. And actually, if you had a wide enough door in your house, you actually could drive it into your house and park it in the kitchen. I don't know. But it's actually quite impressive because the car that is claimed to be the world's smallest production car, which we're going to talk about later, which is the PLP50, the PLP50 is actually wider than this car, almost by a foot. So, very interesting opportunity here that Larmar was taking in a microcar to try to resolve some issues of parking and city congestion, things like that. Also made it very easy to drive around in congestion, a little bit like motorcycles do today. You can kind of go around tight areas, things like that, much more efficiently than you would in a full-size car of this period. So, and as I say here, the initial target market was typically for the women to use as a shopping car, which we just talked about. But they also had models where they had hand controls for folks with disabilities. But sales were limited. Not really surprising. Not many people look for a single-seat car, especially when you have a family. And the unique styling didn't always catch on. But that, kind of brings to another interesting point, and a number of our microcars in the collection, they also had what was termed at the time, they came out of invalid cars. So invalid cars were another kind of sector of this microcar world for World War II veterans who had become disabled from some type of injury in the war, and they typically would have hand controls or things like that if they had lost their legs, so that they could still be mobile and get around the cities and be able to drive vehicles still. So there's kind of some various branches of this microcar world. We actually have a Velorex in the collection that was kind of birthed out of the invalid car industry. So this is one that obviously is typical controls on it, not one of the invalid models. So another vehicle you're going to see, this one's out in the gallery. This is the 1951 Hoffman. This is actually a one-of-a-kind car. This is, I don't want to say prototype because it wasn't really a prototype necessarily. It was one man's idea to build a car. So Michael Hoffman, shop foreman in Munich, and he designed and built this car mainly out of hardware store and junkyard parts between 1945 and 1951. Had a very small engine, very slow speed. Jeff, I think you said it won't go over 25 mile an hour? Yep. I haven't had the opportunity to drive this one yet. Jeff has. But it's extremely slow. The three wheels mean that the car was considered a motorbike in Germany, not a car, and thus was tax-free, and no license was required to operate it at the time. So here, stepping into another realm of the microcar world, microcars were also built at the time, especially in the post-war Europe, depending on the country you were in, for various reasons. Germany, there were certain cars that met certain standards to make them a motorbike where you wouldn't have to pay taxes or have a license necessarily to drive those because they fell into an area of the law that didn't need anything. There were also material shortages that led a lot of these vehicles in countries to be three-wheeled instead of four-wheeled because there was limited rubber, right? There were limited tires. So if you only have three wheels, you don't have to worry as much about how easy it's going to be to find all the wheels you need, all the tires you need. And in France, there were cars that were sans permit. So they were without permit. And same thing, if they were in a certain class, small size, small engine, they did not require any type of permitting or licensing to be able to drive them. So part of this microcar world, as we go through this, you're going to see it was an idea to keep people mobile, be it an invalid car. It was an idea in some places to ease congestion and parking, but in some places it was also an idea to save money. Not only in materials, but also for the person who's going to own it. You can imagine post-World War II Europe is in a basically reconstruction period. There's not a lot of money. There's not a lot of materials. And so people are looking for ways to still be mobile, but don't have the money to go out and buy a brand new car. So a lot of people start either buying microcars that they don't have to pay taxes on, or they get really creative and build their own. So according to Gottfried Gerhauser, I hope I'm saying that right, who restored the car, he actually kept the car as original as possible. It actually has, if you go out and look at it tonight, it has an asymmetric roof line and windshield, and that was all original. Mr. Hoffman did not get the car symmetrical when he was building it. And his description of the handling of the car, and Jeff can attest to this as well, it's a bit like a drunk leaving a hotel bar. It is not terribly stable. The wheel base is actually shorter than the track of the front wheels, so it becomes a bit of an unstable car. And the entire engine is cradled on the rear wheel that turns. So when you turn the wheel, all of the weight of the engine, everything is turning in that back on that single wheel. So again, I haven't driven it yet, but from those who I've talked to who have, it likes to just kind of start rocking when you turn the wheels. So one of the things we like to say at the museum when we talk about some of our cars, there are good ideas. They're just not always practical. So this was a good idea for Mr. Hoffman to have his own vehicle that was not going to cost him money and taxes and things like that. Might not have been the most practical car to have and drive around. Also, if when you open the door and get a good look at it, it's a fairly big microcar in the world of microcars. It's extremely difficult to get into. It's a very small opening. The wheelhouse is in the way. You can see the door in the picture here. Is there a laser on this? Whoop. Evidently not. The door sill comes, is quite high, so you've got a bit of a step in. It's a very challenging car to get into. So the 1953 Microcar, that is here as well in the exhibit, and you can take a look at it. This is actually a really cool car. This is the only Microcar that I believe that survives. I haven't been able to find the other one. We believe it was destroyed. And very interesting idea here coming out of France. The idea of this car was to actually have it look larger than it is. The body panels were actually built quite large and flowing to make the appearance more as much car-like as you can with a three-wheeler. And but it has a very high seating position, no doors. And, it was just kind of an idea to try to make you feel a little bit more like you had a bigger car than you really had with the Microcar. So it does seem quite spacious because of all of that. And the motor was mounted on the front forks, and the front suspension is actually via rubber bands. So you'll see people are getting really creative with these microcars when they're trying to build them. Again, that lack of materials, springs, things like that in that post-war era. And as I said earlier, there were 2 prototypes built that we know of, and but as far as we know, this is the only surviving Microcar in the world. So the 1953 Roven D4, this is built in France, and this is actually interesting because it's probably one of the microcars from the 50s that, kind of like the new map baby here, is actually very well styled to make it look like a real automobile of the time, or a full-size automobile of that era. So Robert and Raoul de Roven, they began building cycle cars and motorcycles in the 1920s, so that big cycle car craze that came before the microcar craze, or the microcar world began. And after World War II ended, here the French government encouraged the development of economy cars to get the nation moving again after the devastation of the war. So going back to that kind of what I just talked about, with the governments kind of also influencing this and trying to get these small, fuel-efficient, affordable cars out to the public. The D4 that you see outside in the gallery, this went into production in 1950, and Roven was most successful in those early 1950s era. And they continued production through 1961, but sales really didn't do well in the late 50s and early 60s because eventually, as the reconstruction happened in France and the car companies got back going, economy got better, the microcars could not really compete with the mass-produced larger cars of that era from the French manufacturers. So it's one of the things that kind of in that 1960s period starts pushing the microcars out of existence, because the factories are back up and running, the economy's coming back, and people are able to move back into those full-size vehicles rather than affordable microcars. All right. So back over to Germany. This is the 1954 Daus. This is a prototype. This is the only one in the world. And Otto Daus was one of the rare individuals that not only decided he could build his own car, he actually did it. We have a handful of those cars in the collection that somebody said, you know what, I can build a microcar. I can build something that I can drive around. And Daus was one of those gentlemen. So from 1929 to 1947, he was the chief designer for Wedel und Sohn. I apologize to I know there's a few folks that are from Germany here. If I'm butchering these words, I do apologize. Which they were making industrial three-wheeled trucks called the Tempo. And then in 1948, Otto left that company, starting his own engineering firm. And they actually that engineering firm continued doing work for Wedel, but it was during that time that Otto engineered his own prototype microcar and actually built it, and fortunately the Lane Museum wound up with it. Interestingly, in our collection, we also have a Daus truck, which very little is known about. We're actually doing the research on that to try to figure out when Daus built that vehicle and what his intent was with that vehicle. So the 1956 PTV, here's a country I haven't talked about, Spain. This is a Spanish microcar. PTV was a line of cars produced by that company there. I'll try my best. Auotmobiles Utilitarios, S.A., a Spanish company based near Barcelona. And again, here's one that looks a little bit like a real car than what was the French Voisin designed bi-scooter. It always played second fiddle to that car as far as sales were concerned. So Voisin, who built actually some very high-end, beautiful automobiles in France, eventually also penned the design of a microcar called the bi-scooter. And that car went into production in France and was actually exported to Spain as well. The Spanish, they were so close together there, and the Spanish people actually loved that car and bought it in droves. And so when PTV came out with their car, they couldn't quite ever break the sales record that the bi-scooter was having. Kind of always was second, even though it was, the car of that country. It seemed that the Spanish people liked the bi-scooter better than the PTV. So as I say here, the pretty little 250cc two-seater two-seater, offered decent performance and a bit more luxury than its competition. Later versions offered a 400cc engine that gave it a higher top speed and the expense of more, but it also led to more expensive fuel costs because they were burning more fuel. And then when Fiat formed Seat in Spain and introduced the Fiat 600 at a very nearly the same price as both the bi-scooter and the PTV, both of those companies quickly folded because Fiat sales started skyrocketing. So the 1956 Moshe CM125Y was built in France. And Charles Moshe was France's kind of best-known maker of pedal cars as a practical means of transportation, especially during World War II. We have some of Moshe's pedal cars in our collection, and they actually played a significant role in France during the war because people were able, in the German-occupied part of France, they were able to actually, in the middle of the night, get in these pedal cars and pedal past the German checkpoints without being heard and get out of that controlled area into safe territories in France and other countries. Some of those were actually even fitted with a small motor that after they got far enough away from the German checkpoints, they'd actually start the engine and get going. They didn't have to pedal all the way. So Moshe's play a very important role in World War II in France, helping people escape the German armies. But it wasn't until after the war that Moshe moved away from those pedal cars and introduced microcars. And the CM125Y was offered with a very modern steel body on it, proper doors, fixed side windows, and a fabric top that folded back. I'm pointing over here like the car's here. I apologize. I'll point up at the screen. At the peak of these cars, at peak production in the early 50s, he was making 40 cars a month. And when French legislation changed in 1958, dropping the engine size to drive without a license to 50 cc's, the customer base for this obviously started to dwindle, and Moshe eventually would basically stop production of the vehicles. So this is another thing, as I said, after the war, they started introducing these, sans permit engine sizes, but as the economy grew and came back, France especially started dropping that engine size so that they could capture more revenue on permits and licenses. The 1958 Messerschmitt, also out in the gallery tonight. This is probably one of the most recognizable microcars ever built in Germany. And Messerschmitt was one of the first and among the most successful of the microcars, especially out of Germany, that would hit the motoring scene in the 1950s. And although it bears the name of the famous aircraft builder, Willy Messerschmitt, he had very little to do with the car's design and building. Fritz Fend actually designed the car, and it was built at the old Messerschmitt factory, which could no longer build aircraft after World War II. Of course, Germany had a lot of regulations and rules put on it in that post-war era. One of those was that the aircraft companies that were building the fighter planes could not be building planes anymore. So they found a way to keep the factory running, building microcars. There's a bit of a misconception around these cars because they do have the canopy that folds open. There are stories that, they were using leftover fuselages of the planes, things like that. They weren't. This was a fully designed car that was being stamped out and made by the company to keep the factory going and keep those German folks employed there at the Messerschmitt factory. The 1958 BMW Isetta. This is another one of those microcars that's probably extremely recognizable, and I'll explain why here in a minute. But another German-built microcar. Driven by the need for the post-war affordable transportation, BMW, who had built some amazing cars pre-World War II, decided to supplement slow sales of their larger models with the inexpensive Isetta. 1955, BMW acquired the license from an Italian company called ISO. They were actually originally a refrigerator company, and at the time they designed the Isetta and were building it, they were still building their refrigerators. Eventually, ISO would go on to build some fantastic sports cars, ISO Grifo, ISO Revolta, and but BMW bought the rights to produce the Isetta, and this is kind of one of the cars that keys the term or coins the term the bubble car of the microcar world. As many as about 3,900 Isettas were sold in the United States during 1958 alone, but the U.S. sales slowed when California made a rule that Isettas could not enter their state's highway systems due to the CCs and the slower speeds that those Isettas realized. It has 10-inch tires, weighs less than 800 pounds, and goes from 0 to 30 in about 11 seconds. So a blistering fast car, if you will. Mechanically, though, it is an extremely reliable car. It is actually an amazingly reliable car. There's a number of collectors and restorers of these Isettas in the U.S., and they are amazing. I've driven a number of Isettas, and they're actually a fantastic car to drive. Probably made most famous by the TV show Family Matters. Everybody remember that TV show? Yeah, a gentleman named Jaleel White, who played a character named Steve Urkel. Now do you guys all remember the car? Yeah. So Steve Urkel was kind of the quirky neighbor next door, a bit of a nerd in that time period, and they actually had him driving a BMW Isetta, which really kind of was, in some ways, a rebirth of interest in the car during that 1980s and 90s period, because here we see this quirky little microcar on TV every Friday night, TGIF, for those that remember. I grew up with it, so it was a fantastic way to kind of bring this car back into the limelight in that time period. So the 1959 New Map Solito van. So we've already seen the name New Map, okay, with the New Map baby that we have back there. During the 1950s, obviously, they were still building the New Map microcars. But then under the direction of Robert Robin, they were producing a range of, that's a typo, three-wheelers, including scooters and the Solito utility truck, which you will see out in the gallery. And these vehicles were built at the sheet metal division of New Map, so where they were actually stamping out the sheet metal. And that company was called the Société Lyonnaise de Tôlerie. I'm terrible at French, I apologize. Hence the odd name. So you see here, Solito comes from the first two letters of each of the company's name, Solito. So the three-wheeled van is only 4.5 feet tall, 4.5 feet wide, and 8 feet long, and it weighs approximately 330 pounds. So you can imagine this is a fantastic little, commercial vehicle to haul supplies around in the small streets of France, in the cities, moving things around, say, from market to market or from market to your home. So it was a fantastic little microcar commercial vehicle. The 1959 Fram King Fulda S7, which you'll see out in the gallery, this was a Swedish microcar. So again, expanding kind of that around Europe range of the microcar. The first examples of this model in 1950 actually had a wood frame with alloyed panels, and then eventually, by the time the 1959 was built, it was becoming an all-steel body and chassis. In 1957, the body was fiberglass, giving the Auotmobile a more handsome appearance. So they did a fiberglass body on these eventually as well. By 1956, a four-wheeled model had come out, and the three-wheel model was more popular in countries where the vehicles weren't being taxed by the number of wheels. This led to something very interesting in the microcar production world. And that is a company in Sweden that was licensing its microcar all around Europe to different manufacturers. So the Fram King Fulda design was made in multiple companies around Europe and actually even over in South America and some other places. So it was actually offered in the UK, Ireland, as the Noble 200, and that's the blue and white car you see there. That is in our collection as well, and you can see they're identical cars. They're just producing them in another country under another name. Germany, it became known as the Auotmobile. Holland, it became known as the Bambino. Greece, it was the Attica and the Alta. And then down in Chile, Hans Vahar. And in India, the Bambi. So this is a very interesting opportunity that the Swedish company took to actually license this car out. And as we mentioned in the last slide, if it was a country that deemed it needed to be 3 wheels to keep it in a certain class, they could build the 3-wheel version, or if they could build the 4-wheel version and keep it in a class where it was more affordable, the company that was producing it could do it how they wanted. All right, the 1964 Scooter car. We're going to bring the Scooter car around. I'll actually go backwards. And now we're going to bring Jeff up. So we're going to bring the Scooter car around because the Scooter car has a very interesting story. It actually may be hard to believe, but this was actually manufactured by a company that built railroad locomotives. So you actually see up here, this is one of their 1960s switcher locomotives that was being used in the rail yards around England. It was the Hunslet Engine Works of Leeds, Yorkshire, UK. And it was headed up by Henry Brown. And he decided he wanted to get into the microcar game as well, and decided he would use a Villers two-stroke engine, a very popular engine at the time in England. And the way they came up with the basic design was that Mr. Brown actually sat astride the engine while an assistant drew a chalk line on the floor. So Jeff's going to get in, and you can see he is literally straddling the engine right now. And you can see that all they did was take the shape of a person and draw a chalk line this way and this way around Mr. Brown while he was in the car. Jeff, do you mind if I turn the turntable a little bit?
Oh, it's fine. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, can you kick on his mic?
Am I on?
I don't know. Not yet. Go ahead and try again.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go.
All right.
So I'm going to turn him sideways a bit so you guys can see here. But it's actually very interesting in the way they designed the car so that basically Mr. Brown could fit inside of it. And he did have another requirement, which was he had to have a passenger be able to ride with him as well. So there's actually a back seat behind Jeff. I don't think we need to try to demonstrate sitting 2 people in the car because it gets very uncomfortable. But Jeff, do you want to? There you go.
Yeah, they designed this car for 3 people.
Oh, 3,
So,
that's
yeah,
right.
so the driver sits in the front, and in the back seat, the people would sit in the back, and of course the driver's in the middle, right? So his legs are up in the front, and the passengers are sitting on this. Now, obviously, 3 big people aren't going to get in here, and of course, none of these cars were designed to go like long distances, right? They were all like 10 miles, 20 miles, something like that. But yeah, this was a 3-seater, supposedly.
Yes, yeah. We're not going to try that, no. So, steel chassis, Villers engine inside of it, and it drove a single rear wheel. It had handlebar steering, so this is not actually a steering wheel. It's actually kind of a handlebar, double tiller style steering. Had the single door on the left side, and it's a very, very interesting car. Coming out of a locomotive company, you think something as big as a locomotive, and then they come down to something as small as a Scooter car microcar.
This car has another interesting tidbit. I bought it from a gentleman in England, and in England they have a rally from the northern tip of England, which is called, is that Land's End, to the southern tip, which is about, I think it's 1,000 kilometers. And they do this rally every year. It's a classic car rally. And this car actually competed in that rally. So I think it's more, it's a couple days long. But it actually has a top speed of 50 miles an hour and really cruises pretty 45 miles an hour is pretty comfortable in this, assuming you're not going up a hill, right?
And this is the great thing about having Jeff here is he's driven most of these cars and can give us firsthand knowledge and understanding of what it's like to drive one of these cars, especially long distance, because he will take these cars on rallies and drive them pretty much anywhere and everywhere. So, all right. So now the last car we're going to talk about. Jeff, I'm going to move you around here. Yep, let's go the other way. It's closer. So the 1964 Peel P50. Now, the Peel P50 we have is a very early replica of the original Peel P50. They built 50 of these cars originally. Ours, I believe, is a kind of a one-off replica that a gentleman built, actually, who knew some of the folks from the Peel company and was able to get some, probably the mold even, for the body. So it's probably one of the most accurate early replicas of a Peel P50 that exists today. But built on the Isle of Man, the Peel Engineering Company was originally building fiberglass motorcycle fairings. And they entered the car market in 1955, and they brought out the Peel P50 in 1962. Building it from 62 to 1964. The cars were only 4.5 feet long, 3 feet 3 inches wide, and 4 feet high. They weighed 250 pounds. It is a single-seat car, one person driving it around, made probably most famous most recently by Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear when he did an episode on it. But the interesting thing about the Peel P50 is that it only has forward gear. It does not have a reverse gear. So when you get into a position where you need to reverse, Jeff, could you reverse the car for us?
Or you can turn it around that way.
Oh. All right. There we go. We can edit that out later. Don't worry.
So another interesting thing about the P50 is, so it weighs 250 pounds. So when a typical person gets in it, you're not doubling the weight of the car, but it's pretty close, right? So it makes a big difference when you get in. But a lot of people think, like in a P50, that it doesn't have that much room, which is really not true. It's actually pretty roomy for a microcar. So.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, you're about 6'1"?
I'm 5'10".
Oh, you're 5'10". Wow, I thought you was taller.
And really, once I get in, there's room up above there. But another interesting thing about driving it on the road is, so when the car started, the engine's right here on the right-hand side. So you have all this idle boom inside this fiberglass tub, right? So you stop at a red light, and everybody that stops next to you wants to say, hey, what kind of car is that, or something like that, right? And you can literally, you can't, when you're in here, you can't hear anything except boom, 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 boom. So it's really hard to talk to people.
But you can see it's a very interesting design, single door on the left-hand side. As Jeff said, the Peels were actually quite roomy. I mean, we've had some folks drive it that were probably 6'2", 6'3", and actually fit in inside of it very well.
We had a football player get in at one time for the news, and he was actually able to get in there. We had to give him a lot of help to get him out, but he actually fit in there. And they also made the door, like on purpose, they made the door really big,
yeah,
right, to make it easier to get in and out of.
Yes, unlike some of the other microcars that we've talked about that didn't take the easement into the car in consideration. But Peel actually built a number of other vehicles. They built the P50, but they also built the Trident and the Peel Viking. And so they were a very prolific microcar producer, which you would think kind of odd and interesting out of the Isle of Man, a very small country. And but obviously very, very well known for the motorcycle racing that happens on the Isle of Man. And of course, where they got their start with motorcycle fairings and pieces like that. So, you know, the microcar kind of moment in automotive history is very interesting. It speaks to a lot of different, cultures around, especially Europe. after that the post-World War II reconstruction of those countries that were kind of destroyed in many ways by the war. And it's a moment in time that I think is very interesting to look back on and think about how these engineers and companies kind of figured out a way to build a vehicle that they could get out to the public, helping the countries regrow, making sure that the cars they were building in these cases were able to be affordable to the people that needed to buy them. They were, they didn't have to pay taxes on many of these. They didn't have to go down and pay for permits or licenses to drive them, all to help their countries rebuild and kind of survive that post-war era. And, also this still, again, leads to the idea that, a lot of people have had over time, starting with things like cycle cars and various small cars even before the war, but how can we make a car economical and affordable to the masses? Henry Ford started that idea with the Model T, but everybody can't build a big luxury car like a Rolls Royce or something like that. We have to have a plethora of vehicles available for all classes and all time periods, right? The post-war era, people don't have a lot of money. You have to build a car that they can afford and use. So, with that, I say thank you all for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed the talk tonight. Jeff may have a few more comments. I'm not sure. Nope, he's good. But I do, if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. Jeff and I will answer those questions to the best of our ability.
Yep. So we have a couple microphones here. So if you'll just raise your hand, and maybe we'll raise up the light so we can see.
We've got. Were these electric start or pull start or?
So some of the microcars did have electric start. Some are pull start. They're basically like a moped engine or a small motorcycle engine that either would have a lever start. There was a method of using a lever to start vehicles. The PLP50 is a string, right? It's like a rope. That's a lever. Which one's there's one that's a rope pull in the collection. The Ardex, yeah. So there's one that's like a lawnmower rope pull to get it going. So it was a wide range.
Thanks very much. It's a great presentation. What I'm interested in is issues of safety and reliability, maintenance. Can you address that?
Safety?
Safety and reliability. Well, okay, how about just maintenance?
Are we talking about microcars?
Yeah.
It seems like you want to talk a little bit about it. Yeah.
In terms of safety, there is no safety, right? It's you can see, especially today, you're smaller than anything else on the road. My view of driving a microcar is you act like you're on a motorcycle, right? Because whatever happens, whoever's fault it is, you're going to be the one that's going to get the short end of it. The good thing I will say about driving a microcar on the road is because they're weird looking, right? And people hardly ever see them on the road, that there's almost no road rage when you see it. The biggest problem with driving the P50 on the road, which goes 20 miles an hour, especially if we drive it outside the museum, up and down the 4-lane road that's next to us, 40 miles an hour, 2 lanes on each side. You think you can stay in the right lane and you're not holding up all the traffic. Well, what happens is the person behind you gets right up next to you and they want to take a picture. So now you are blocking the whole road, right? And so they take their picture and they take off, and then the next person. But in terms of reliability, that varies greatly from the cars, right? Like the BMW Isetta was very well developed, was a very reliable car. The Messerschmitt was very well developed, very reliable car. A lot of microcars were made in, 50 P50s, right? Scooter car, I think, made a couple thousand cars, right? So the cars that had less numbers tend to be less reliable because they had less development. So it's kind of all over the place. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
What were the prices of these cars?
Wow, that's a wide range.
Yeah, so that, the P50, everybody laughs at it, but their market was, so most people at that time were driving a scooter, okay? That's all they could afford. So on a cold, rainy day, that's a pretty bad option. So they were trying to build something that was going to be just a little bit more expensive than a scooter that would keep you dry. Okay, that was their only that was kind of their marketing criteria. So, you know, the Peels obviously were very, very cheap. And I think I don't. I'd have to look up the price, but it seems like it was 150 pounds or something, something like that. You know, and Izetta, I mean, when they came to America, I think they were $995.
Yeah, I think $900 and $1,000. Yep.
So they were cheap. They were cheap and cheaper.
I think we had a few down here, Bruce. If you want to bring the mic down.
Excuse me, I have a question. I got to ask this. I'm a retired California Highway Patrol officer, so for me to see one of these out there, are these legal in every state? I mean, because I know in California there's I forget what the CC is, but you can't have these out there. So,
right, and that's in 1958 when California enacted the CC law on the freeways. That's what pretty much killed the BMW Izetta in the United States. And yeah, so a lot of these cars now, today, after the CC laws went into effect, are not legal on highways and those, but on side streets, things like that, we have pretty much every vehicle registered in the state of Tennessee and can take it on the road.
I think now because they're an antique, they're exempt from current regulations.
Yeah.
But that, you know, that's a state by state thing, right? So, and I'm not an expert on all 50 states.
A question about the Peel. I saw at a British car show several years ago a Peel that had like a bubble top. Was that the Trident?
Yes, the Peel Trident has the bubble top.
And how does that compare with this car?
So the Trident was a two-seat, so it sat two people, and but still in the microcar class of vehicles. And Jeff, you might be able, because you drove the Trident on a rally, didn't you?
Yeah, I've taken it on a couple of rallies. So the Trident had the same drivetrain, right? And one of the things about the P50 is it's pretty roomy, right? But the Trident is not a lot bigger than that, right? It's got a big bubble hatch that comes down over top of you. It's tight. Like two people my size are like shoulder to shoulder, right? I mean, and then your shoulders are on the outside of the plexiglass. If you're a good-sized person like our mechanic, Greg Costin, when he drives it, he sits in the middle of the two seats because there's no way two people will fit in him. Now, the problem with driving the Trident is if you're by yourself, they're all right-hand drive, right? So, because they all came from England. So if you're turning to the left, there's a huge weight bias because you're alone by yourself on the right. The Trident's better with two people in it because it's more balanced, although it's still pretty easy to tip over. So in the Trident, the other disadvantage about the Trident is because it has a bubble top, and it has a little door on the side like a ticket door, but it's really hot in there because what happens is you have two people in there making heat. The engine's right behind you making heat, and if it's sunny outside, you get cooked in short order. So
I'm going to ask another question that you already answered for some of us on the front row before the presentation began, but some of the other people might be interested in. How many cars in your collection did you acquire from the Microcar Museum that formerly existed in Madison, Georgia?
So we purchased 6 cars from that auction. The Larmar was one of them. The Douse that's out there is one of them. The Hoffman is a third one. And then there's 3 more that are not here. Yeah.
Oh, we got one back there, and then I think Bruce will bring the mic up.
Because of how old they are they even safe to drive?
That's kind of a relative question, right? I mean, that's safety, as Jeff said a little bit ago, is you're kind of taking your risk when you take a vehicle out, any antique vehicle or classic vehicle, and in a microcar, you really, as Jeff said, you got to kind of think of it as you're driving a motorcycle or a scooter. You have to pay attention to all the other drivers around you that either are being distracted by the fact that they're seeing something that they don't see a lot, or the fact that they may miss seeing the vehicle. I actually years ago was driving an Isetta long before I worked for the Lane Motor Museum, and a motorhome actually did not see me down as low as I am, and it was a very close call, but fortunately didn't get hit. I guess my answer to that would be safety is kind of relative in one of these vehicles.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Yes.
The way you classify it, let me give you three cars: the Crosley, the Morris Minor, and the Nash Metropolitan. Would any of those be considered as microcars?
Because
No, they're
got to be less than 400 cc's, and even the early Crosleys were 600.
600.
I think, and then
Yeah. So
Yeah.
they're more in the kind of
We call-
compact.
we call that mini car. You know, we
Mini car.
kind of go microcar, and then mini car is kind of the next class up. So yeah.
Yes.
What was the economy? How many miles per gallon or kilometers per liter did they get?
Oh wow. I
So-
don't know the answer. Jeff may.
Yeah, a real common claim was 100 miles to the gallon. That was a really common claim. But I can tell you that, and a lot of that depends on how you drive it, right? So Peel claimed 100 miles per gallon on a P50. So the P50 claim top speed was 25. I'm skeptical that it's that high. It's maybe more like 20. But the point is, if you drive wide open at 20, which you really need to do to just even try to, I'm not saying being safe, but be as much out of the way as you can, right? You're not going to get 100 miles to the gallon. You're probably going to get more like 30 or 40, right? If you went 10 miles an hour, because obviously fuel economy, there's a premium range for the engine, right, where you get the best economy. And that's not wide open. But 100 miles was, you see that in a lot of microcar literature, 70, 80, 100 miles per gallon. The Isetta, the Henkel, I did a 1,200 mile rally in a Henkel, which was 200 cc's 4-stroke. And we didn't check the mileage, but we filled up at lunchtime every day and did about 250 miles, and it was a gallon and a half tank. So it probably got about 60 to 70, but we were driving wide open almost the whole time. So,
Mind you, in the mountains as well.
yeah, yeah, with two people, which is a loaded microcar.
I believe we have one back there. Yeah.
Of all the microcars, what's the fastest that any of them would go?
The Messerschmitt, they claimed, I think, top speed of like 60 to 65. And because it's pretty aero, and it had a 200 cc motor, although it was a 2-stroke, and it was fairly high horsepower at like, I think it's 15 or 16. It truly probably would go 65. So, I might be wrong, but I think that's the fastest microcar that I can pull up in my head.
Yeah.
Can you explain why these went away in the 60s and the Japanese K car lasts until the 90s?
Well, I'll take a kind of a rough stab at it, and maybe Jeff will have something to add. But with a lot of the European countries that were building microcars, kind of as we mentioned, the factories came back online that were building the bigger cars. The economy came back. Everything was kind of getting back to normal. We talk a lot about that nowadays, right? Getting back to normal. But that post-war era was over. People could afford the cars. And then I think we have to look at the fact that Europe and America are extremely large masses of land. Japan is very small. And they have a lot of congestion in Japan. So the K class of car is meant to help ease that congestion and kind of keep a smaller car on the roads in such a small country with so little room for them to have automobiles in mass quantity as they do. But the K class really is to try to help ease that congestion and keep things moving a little better. Would you have things to add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is, so really what happened was, by the early 60s, every country in Europe kind of had its people's car, right? The Mini came out in 1959. The Fiat 500 came out in 57.
Mid 50s.
Yeah, maybe 56. So
Yeah.
Italy had its people car. You had the Volkswagen, and then France had the Citroen 2CV, which actually came out in earlier than that. But by 60, they'd put a bigger motor in it, and it would go 50 miles an hour. So you kind of had what people called a proper car, right? More reliable, more room, just more of everything. And by then, the economy improved enough that the mass of people could afford those cars, right? And so these cars really kind of disappeared because although they were probably never super practical, they were better than scooters and bicycles. So that's kind of what killed the microcar, in my estimation.
I've got one. I have a question for both you gentlemen. Which one tugs at the heart the most, the coolness factor? Which one of the 550 cars in the collection is defined as what you might say the one that draws your heart out the most?
You want to take that first, Jeff?
That's a tough one. I like every car for what it represents, I guess, is my answer to that. And I enjoy driving every car in the collection. If it's 98 degrees outside in the summertime, am I going to take the P50 out and drive around the block? Probably not, right? So part of it is what time of the year it is. And part of it, too, might be, if you're going to an appointment that you've got to be at a certain time, you don't take the Amphicar because every time you stop at a red light, someone wants to know about the Amphicar, right? So some of those things come into consideration. But the answer is I enjoy all the cars for what they represent.
And I'm going to take the easy pass. I've been at the museum for 7 months as the curator. I have not gotten to drive every car in the collection yet. So already in 7 months, I have a number of favorite cars already in the collection. So I think I'm going to take the punt on that. And but I can say one of my I look at things also from a historic perspective as a student of history of technology, and what the car's story is, along with the technical interest and all of the development stories. So I talked about Gyro X, very interesting car. Jeff gave me the opportunity to drive it a week and a half ago. Very interesting, great tie to American automotive history. And then we also have the Simca weekend prototype that was built in 1954 and given to, who many of you are going to recognize this name, given to the French actress Brigitte Bardot. And she owned that car for many, many, many years. And we have that car in the collection as well. So it's hard to say. There are a lot of, with 550 cars, there tends to be a lot of favorites.
About what percentage of the collection is two-stroke versus four-stroke? And because these cars all obviously came out in the days of leaded gas, do you have any problem running unleaded gas in them?
Do you know the percentage? I certainly don't.
If you count the 75 microcars we have, I would say 3/4 of those are two-strokes, okay? And then we have, Trabant, DKW. So if you talk about the entire collection, I mean, I'm only guessing, right? I would say 125, maybe 100. In terms of the lead, two-strokes didn't really need lead as much as valves did in a four-stroke, right? So it's for the two-stroke, it's really not a problem. And the fact that synthetic two-stroke oil of today has 10 times the lubrication ability of the old oils, right? When they used to mix 20-to-1 with almost everything. We burn 40-to-1 in most of these cars because they just don't need the oil. So it's really not an issue. Although, quite honestly, most of the smaller microcars, we use racing fuel in them because it has a longer shelf life. And even if you exercise, like a POP 50, if you drive it around the back parking lot for 10 minutes, you burned up a pint of gas, maybe, right? So so we use racing fuel as a better quality fuel also.
Okay, we got time for one more, and then we'll let you guys come on down and take a look at the cars and maybe ask some other questions.
Are all of the vehicles in the collection at the lane operable?
So yeah, we tend to say about 3/4 of the collection, or a little more, is operable. We try to keep everything running and driving, but we do have the handful of projects that are, cars that are in need of restoration, or there's something with them that we need to repair, so they're not running. But typically about 75-80% of the collection, we say, is able to be operated pretty quickly, whether we can get right in it and drive it, or we may need to have one of our mechanics take a quick look and double check fluids, things like that. But yeah, we try to keep everything in operable condition, so we can take it out and demonstrate it, or take it to rallies or shows, events, things like that around not only Nashville, greater area, but around the country. Not a problem. All right.
Okay, so well, thank you everybody for showing up, and I'd like to thank Derek and Jeff for taking the time to come down here and talk to us about the Microcars. And we have some extra minutes, so if you guys want to, come on down and take some pictures or whatever you want to do. But thank you again for showing up. Really appreciate you being here.